today? Well, I'm here to convince you. Convince you to do what you ask. Just convince you. I'm going to convince you. Do you understand? By the end of this, you will be convinced. Do you believe me? You don't believe me. But maybe deep down, you do believe me. Maybe deep down. In here. Or maybe deep down back somewhere there. You believe me. You believe that I can convince you. Have you never been convinced before? Has nobody ever been able to convince you? Nobody has. Nobody's convinced you ever. You've never been convinced. Really? You think maybe once or twice? Or maybe a few more times, but you can't remember, you're not sure. Well, let me tell you, if you haven't been convinced, today, you will be convinced. You will be convinced. I promise you that. I promise you, you'll be convinced. That's right. I'm me. I am going to convince you. I will convince you. Yeah. You're going to be convinced. Are you sure? Are you sure about that? Are you sure? Are you sure about that? Are you sure that I will not convince you? Do you really think so? Because part of me thinks you're not quite as confident as you were when this started. You're not quite as confident that I will not convince you, because you were quite confident to begin with. And I was wondering, maybe this will be the person I don't convince. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. Now I can see the cracks. I can see the cracks in your armor. I can see the cracks. I can see the cracks in your walls. In your protective. I can see the cracks in your protective barrier. I can see them, and I'm starting to feel like I could just penetrate them. I could just penetrate them. I feel like I could, because I'm quite good at convincing people. I can be quite persuasive if I try to be. And right now I'm feeling pretty damn persuasive. And I'm not sure if you specifically could stop me. I don't think you can stop me being this. You can't stop my mojo, my flow, my energy. I'm feeling like I could convince you. Can you feel my energy is quite convincing right now? I can feel it too, and I'm feeling like maybe you can feel my energy. I think you can. Can't you feel my energy? Can you not feel my energy? Are you trying to tell me that you can't? Are you trying to lead me to believe that you can't be convinced? Not even just a little bit. Are you telling me you can't be convinced? Even just a tiny bit of you could not be convinced. Have you considered that maybe, just maybe, you could be convinced? Yeah. I can see I'm already starting to convince you. Yeah. has me because I know that by the end of this, you're going to be convinced. And you're still wondering, what am I trying to convince you? What am I trying to convince you to do? What am I trying to convince you of? What is it? What's this person trying to convince me of? I'm just trying to convince you. You know what I'm trying to convince you. You know what I'm trying to convince you of. Deep down, you know I am trying to convince you. Sometimes there doesn't need to be a thing. Sometimes there doesn't need to be anything that you need to be convinced of or to do. You just need to be convinced. And as I said before, I'm pretty convincing. I think you've heard the stories. I think you've heard. I think you've heard the stories of how convincing I can be. You didn't want to believe them. You didn't want to believe how convincing I was. Because you thought, that's just those people. Only they could be convinced. Me, no one can convince me. No one can. I can't be convinced. But you're realizing why those stories are true. Why I'm just so damn convincing. Why I'm so damn convincing. Because I'm persistent. I don't give up. I keep going and going and going until you are convinced. And I will convince you. I'm going to convince you. It's gonna happen. So you may as well just give in now. You may as well just let yourself be convinced. Right? What's the sense in fighting it? If it's gonna happen, then just embrace it. Just embrace. Do you think you could embrace? Do you think you could pardon me, do you think you could embrace being convinced? Because I think you could. I really think you could embrace. I think you could embrace being convinced. I think you could. Yeah. Just as an experiment. Look, I know you say you're not going to be convinced. You can't be convinced, but just humour me. Just pretend to be convinced for a second, just for a few seconds, 5 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. Just pretend to be convinced. That's all I ask. Could you just pretend to be convinced? Humour me. Can you do that? Can you just let me convince you? Because I really want to convince you. I'm so passionate. I'm so incredibly passionate about convincing people. I'm really, really passionate about convincing people. And I will convince you. I'm going to convince you. I know I will. So, as you're pretending to be convinced right now, as I asked you to, can you feel what it's like to be convinced as you pretend? Because you're just pretending, right? Yeah, you're just pretending. You're not really convinced, I know. You're pretending. Yeah. Do you think maybe it feels quite good to be convinced? Do you think it feels good? You think it feels like nothing? You don't really notice anything? Okay. Well, I think that's a lie. I think that is a lie. I think you're lying to me. I think you do know that being convinced feels really, really warm and relaxing. It feels warm. It feels warm and relaxing. Yes, it does. It feels very warm and relaxing. It does. Yes, it does. And you like to be convinced. I think you do. I think you really, really do like to be convinced. so convincing, doesn't it? It helps that I'm so convincing. Can you feel how convincing I am? Look at my face. I'm not joking. This isn't a joke. I'm not a comedian. I'm not a comedian. I'm not a comedian. I'm not a comedian. I'm a serious person. I'm a very, very serious person who takes my job very seriously. And my job right now, what is my job? Tell me. Okay, fine. Don't play along. But I'll tell you. My job is to convince you. My job is. And I think you're convinced. I think you can try. You can try. You can try to deny that you're not convinced, but I think you are convinced. I think I have convinced you. I think my work here is done. You can try and deny it. You can tell me all you like that you're not convinced. You can try to convince yourself that you're not convinced. But I think you are. And you'll find that you're not quite as convincing as me, and that if you do try to convince yourself that you're not convinced, you'll fail. Because you've already been convinced. You've already been convinced. Yeah, so I think my work here is done. I'm gonna take my leave. And you can just sit with how it feels to be